Well, let's get more on the crisis in Gaza now with Sultan Barakat, who joins me here in the studio. He's the director of the Global Institute for Strategic Research at Hamad Bin Khalifa University and is also a professor of politics and post-war recovery studies at the University of York. Welcome to the program, Professor. Thank you so much for coming in. Can we first start with this much lauded Security Council resolution that was finally passed last week after almost a week of delays? We know that it was the United States who was in fact holding up the passage of this resolution because as it was essentially acting as a proxy for Israel, it was trying to remove all references to a halt in fighting from this document. So even now, after 21,000 Palestinian deaths in Gaza since October 7th, the United States, arguably the world's biggest superpower, is still refusing to call for an end to the conflict. What do you make of that? Why are they still now refusing to call for a ceasefire after so many civilian deaths?
Well, obviously, I, like everybody else around the world, think it's very unfortunate that the US has taken this position. They're clearly doing it to protect Israel and Israeli interests, and in particular Netanyahu at this particular stage. It's against international humanitarian law. It has really damaged, I think, the reputation of the United States beyond repair at this stage. And more so, it has damaged the whole global balance, the global security model that existed on the basis of the rule of law that largely was introduced by the US and those who won the Second World War. Now, people around the world do not really believe in these values, that it doesn't apply to all equally. And I think that will come back to haunt the US in terms of stability globally. Why they do it? Why are they doing it? I mean, it's just because Israel always wielded an interest within the US politics. And I think the decision-making in Washington is very different from the rest of the United States. Israel wields power within Washington, particularly through their lobbying mechanisms. You could see the statements from congressmen and women, senates, are in great contrast from what people actually think. And people have demonstrated across the United States. Because anyone with the minimum consciousness, would find this absolutely appalling and unacceptable.
And we know towards the end of November, there was that brief truce that was agreed by both sides in order to facilitate the release of some Israeli hostages being held in Gaza, as well as the release of Palestinian prisoners being held in Israel. We know that also the Hamas leadership has recently been in Egypt, potentially talking about another truce. From your understanding, what's holding up the prospect of a second ceasefire in order to facilitate the release of more hostages and prisoners?
Well, I think the most important obstacle is the way Israel reacted after the end of the previous ceasefire. The Hamas and the Palestinians now understand that the moment any exchange is completed, they will go under the Israeli knife yet again. So they are seeking now protection. They're seeking guarantees that Israel will not be able to come back at them when the hostages are released. And this is obviously it's a normal reaction, that if you hold now an asset that is required by the Israelis, you don't want to let go only for to be bombed again a few days later. Until now, Israel has not been able to give that guarantee. What they're offering is an extended ceasefire. They're talking about possibility of 2 weeks in return for the hostages, but without a real clear action or roadmap as to what would happen after these 2 weeks are completed. And of course, from Hamas perspective, this is unacceptable.
Can we talk about what's speculated to be Israel's main objective here? I mean, it says publicly that it wants to destroy Hamas's leadership, but we know that from leaked security memos released by Israeli intelligence and reports in Israeli media that one of the aims that's been leaked has been the pushing out of the Palestinian population from Gaza, potentially into Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. This has been an idea that's been mooted for decades now, essentially trying to make Gaza uninhabitable in order to make it unlivable for the Palestinians who are there. What truth is there to that aim? Do you think that is the ultimate aim?
It's a declared aim by the ultra-right Israeli political parties.
Do you think Netanyahu
and has
believes
been
that
for
as
a
well?
long time? Netanyahu, obviously, he's the greatest believer and supporter of this, and he has to follow it even more now that he had to build a very thin coalition to stick to power. And as you noticed, and your audiences, he declared war in Gaza, which has not been done since 1973 in Israel's history. Declaration of war means that he has suspended the public opinion in Israel. He has practically taken over all the actions. Everything is down to the mini cabinet that he set up for war. And that cabinet is now dominated by these extremists. And this is why you see these actions that are designed to terrorize the Palestinians, both inside Palestine, outside, in Lebanon, not to take any action. And now what we've seen since the passing of this resolution a few days ago by the UN, they're using the same tactic to terrorize the United Nations. They cannot afford to lose their personnel. Nobody is willing to die to provide aid for others. So now he's paralyzed the whole system. He's by escalating the attacks on Gaza, although the resolution calls for an expansion of humanitarian assistance, a scale-up, diversification of the quality of the assistance that comes in, and so on. Agencies are incapable of taking any action because they need safe passage. They need to be sure that their personnel are not going to be killed. They will be able to deliver the aid where it's needed safely for them as well as to the Palestinian population.
There's also this idea that's been floated by Washington and elsewhere that on what a post-Gaza or post-Hamas leadership would look like, and that would potentially involve the involvement of the Palestinian Authority, which is now nominally in charge of a small section of the occupied West Bank. I want to get your thoughts on what the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has had to say, because he gave his first interview since the conflict in Gaza began. Speaking on Egyptian television, he compared the situation to the forced expulsion of Palestinians during the founding of Israel in 1948, known in Palestine as the catastrophe or Nakba. Abbas described the situation as beyond a catastrophe, greater than a war of extermination. He said Gaza has become unrecognizable and that the occupied West Bank is on the brink of imploding. Abbas also criticized the US, blaming it for facilitating the conflict by vetoing the attempted ceasefire resolution at the UN Security Council. Now, Sultan Barakat, can I get your reaction to what Abbas has said? Because we know it seems he's been largely absent during this conflict. Indeed, he's faced criticism by many Palestinians for his lack of leadership during this current crisis. How would you describe the way he's handling it?
Well, he's faced criticism, for lack of leadership. This is the first time he's come public, in a long time, which is unacceptable to a lot of Palestinians. But also he tried to suppress any reaction within the West Bank against Israel. And as you know, there is a form of coordination for security arrangement between his police and the Israelis. And a lot of people would blame him for these random assassinations that are taking place in the West Bank. But nevertheless, what he said there is right in terms of Israel and the United States. But what I feel personally, I don't think Israel is going to just push the Palestinians. I mean, they made the whole area uninhabitable. And then they will say, we can't force people to move out, but we can't stop them from moving out if they wish so. And of course, all normal people would wish to go to a place where they can sustain their livelihood and reestablish their lives and so on. At the same time, Israel relies on Egypt as a very important ally to protect that border with Gaza. And they wouldn't want the Egyptians to be upset. What I think is most likely to happen is they will mutilate Gaza as they did with the West Bank. They're going to split it into three, potentially four enclaves with Israeli security surrounding those enclaves all the way to the waters. And they will start then negotiating with the Palestinians and the international community on how to go back to what Gaza was, i.e. under occupation, under siege, on the 7th of October. This is, I suspect, the plan for Netanyahu for now. But what Netanyahu is doing, his real gain is not happening in Gaza. His gain is happening in the West Bank. Is the arming of the settlers. This was something that his cabinet wanted, his extreme sides wanted. They now got that. They have managed to turn the law so that the settlements are not governed under exceptional emergency military rule as it was before. Now they're directly managed through the civilian rule of Israel, which implies that they've practically been annexed. So there is making all these small changes on the ground under the shadow of this war that are really targeting the West Bank. His eye is on the West Bank, and this is why countries like Jordan were very, very concerned, and the statements that come from Jordan is so strong about what's happening in Gaza.
And what about this idea that the Palestinian Authority could perhaps take control of the Gaza Strip? Is that something that would even be remotely palatable to the Palestinians in Gaza?
I mean, nobody can take control, really. I mean, it's going to be very difficult under the Israelis' conditions for security. I mean, imagine now he's going to create these enclaves and then allow population to come back. They have to scrutinize all these people. They have to screen them coming back and strip them from everything possible. It's going to be a very, very tough arrangement. I think Palestinians will find it difficult for any authority coming back on behind the Israeli forces. The best and only option, as far as I'm concerned, is to call for international protection. Gaza and the West Bank has got to be treated like Kosovo was in 1999. It has to be protected by the international community for a certain period of time until they're able to get their act together and elect their own governance mechanism. Anything short of that, I think, will continue the same misery of occupation and violence.
Okay, Professor Sultan Barakat, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much.